being able to contribute and build is by far more interesting than joining something that's already been established. One of the exciting things about the advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing industry, this cluster that's being groomed and grown here in this region, is that it's just starting. The excitement of the new ideas and the ways in which to do business is happening every day here in the Richmond-Petersburg region.
During the pandemic, members of our coalition in the greater Richmond and Petersburg market recognized that there was a critical shortage of essential medicines in the U.S. and the need to reshore the making of those medicines. And that is a key factor in what we are working on here in our market.
It's an exciting time in this region because we have all of these companies that are touching different parts of the pharmaceutical ecosystem. And then we've created a coalition that's creating a workforce and attracting other companies to the region. So we're really working together to build up the pharmaceutical sector in this part of the state.
It's been an honor and a privilege to be able to have this coalition of groups, whether they're economic development groups, service organizations, community colleges, and other universities, as well as other public and private companies coming together through a common cause to try to work in solving this critical national public health security issue.
Those collaborations have been able to create what we call the Alliance for Building Better Medicine.
There's a great desire to actually build this industry here in Virginia.
Virginia is rich for business, and this is an incredible opportunity to expand on an industry like pharmaceuticals. What's happening in Petersburg is one of the most exciting things I think happening in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Over $500 million in federal grants have been applied to that area, close to $1 billion when you factor in private investment, public investment, federal and state investment.
You want to be part of a remarkable team and be part of a whole change of a culture of a region. This is the place to be.
It takes a village. There are so many people involved, and the reshoring of activities, it cuts across sectors and organizations and components of our economy that you wouldn't even think of.
I want to bring the collaboration at the community, the grassroots level. And I think that we have to operate at both levels and even in between to bring that and build that awareness of the opportunities for this region.
The Alliance has really shown me what is possible when education, training, economic and workforce development, localities and business and industry with vision come together.
The way that we prepare a workforce pipeline for biotechnology and pharmaceutical manufacturing in the region is we offer training programs that are sector-led. And by sector-led, that means that we've met with employers and we continue to meet with employers, and they tell us the competencies they need in their employees. And then we build academic programs that develop those competencies for the future workforce.
It connects academic institutions with the companies that put themselves here physically, and this is the cluster.
We have the structure and facilities in place that allow our researchers to develop manufacturing insights that allow us to breathe new life into new and existing manufacturing processes.
All of the work that we're doing here in Central Virginia, it's having an impact on the country as a whole and also internationally with regards to other areas of the world.
Any company that's looking to expand in the life sciences industry would want to consider Virginia as their home. I think that Virginia has a unique opportunity to make a global impact in the life sciences region, and the collaborative suite of companies that are here are already doing that work, and more that join us, we can only make that impact a little bit greater.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the Alliance for Building Better Medicine Supply Chain Webinar Information Series. The series will explore and inform the audience about the growing advanced pharmaceutical manufacturing and biotech ecosystem developing in the Petersburg, Richmond, Virginia region. My name is Vanessa Womack, and I am the Inclusive Community Development Consultant for the Alliance. This webinar will feature Dr. Frank Gupton, founder and CEO of Medicines for All, based at Virginia Commonwealth University's College of Engineering, and co-founder of Flow Corporation. Welcome, Dr. Gupton. Let's get started. Medicines for All is a valued Alliance for Building Better Medicine member and a driving force for our advanced manufacturing cluster. Can you share how and why Medicines for All was launched and what impact it has achieved.
So Medicines for All was launched in 2015, and I think that the driving force behind it was a global need for having essential medicines for global healthcare available at a cost-effective source. So we started working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2015 on one HIV drug. It was a very high-volume drug, and we were asked to see if we could reduce the cost of the drug 10%. They gave us $5 million, and if we were able to reduce the cost 10%, the payback period on the $5 million was about a year. We reduced the cost 40%, and in doing so, we also reduced the carbon footprint by about 95%. And this became a really important landmark for the Institute and allowed us to get sustainable funding from the Gates Foundation since 2015. To date, we've received over $60 million from the foundation to work on tuberculosis, malaria, HIV, and COVID drugs.
Your research efforts worldwide are known for streamlining pharmaceutical processes. Can you tell us more about your use of continuous flow processing to produce active pharmaceutical ingredients?
So when you start thinking about why we do this and what's unique about Medicines for All, I started out my career, let me back up and just say, continuous processing isn't new. It's just new to the pharmaceutical sector. And the interesting thing about this is that I started out my career working in commodity chemicals where continuous processing was pretty normal as a manufacturing platform for producing chemicals. I evolved from that starting point to work on agricultural chemicals, pharmaceutical intermediates, and ultimately pharmaceutical products. So I had that perspective that a lot of pharmaceutical chemists and chemical engineers don't have. And when you start thinking about how we can actually produce drugs more cost effectively, a lot of the cost is associated with the labor that's created as a result of operating in a non-continuous fashion. And this is one of the reasons why pharmaceutical processing went overseas, because labor costs were cheaper over there. So by innovating in the United States and developing automated continuous systems, we've actually been able to create a level playing field between us, India, and China with regards to how we can actually produce drugs in a way that reduces the labor and creates a more competitive environment for domestic manufacturing.
Thank you. Well, that leads into my next question. How does the optimization process deployed at Medicines for All and among the members of the Alliance impact the pharmaceutical supply chain?
So we take a different approach. We start thinking of the pharmaceutical industry. Typically what they do is they develop a process where they get as close to the, for the active ingredients, they get as close to the active ingredient in as few number of steps away from the active ingredient as possible. The problem is that that's a very highly functionalized and expensive molecule as a starting point for the synthesis, so you're already at a disadvantage. What we do is we go back in the process to simple commodity chemicals that are simple building blocks that are readily available through the supply chain. Most of these advanced starting materials that are produced overseas create supply chain vulnerability because we aren't making them over here. If we go backwards to simple starting materials, that then not only gives us a cost-effective advantage, but then also allows us to be able to produce these drugs with a domestic source of raw materials. And all of this contributes to strengthening the supply chain.
Your affiliation with VCU, your role there and at the Biotech Center, how critical is that in this growing APM and biotech ecosystem?
So here's what I'll say about that. Somebody asked me the other day, how did you get here doing what you're doing? And my answer was, everything had to happen exactly the way it did for me to be here working at VCU and working with the Petersburg community and the partners in the Alliance on this fundamental problem about sourcing materials, essential medicines in the United States. If it hadn't happened the way it did, I wouldn't have the experience, I wouldn't have the opportunity, and I wouldn't have the collaborators and connectors that have made this possible. So I've been just very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time.
What are some examples of jobs created and the important opportunities available to participate in this growing section in our region?
So I'll answer this question probably a little differently than you may have thought. I think that it's really important that potential employees get the opportunity to test drive these jobs. And they can do it through co-ops and internships. And I think by doing that, they become more valuable to the employers, and they also are able to become much more valuable to themselves. And I think part of the problem that we have these days is I don't think students and potential people in the Petersburg area actually understand where the opportunities are. And by enlightening them through these co-ops and internships, it gives them a unique opportunity to be able to fulfill a short-term requirement that's with these companies, but also makes them much more valuable in the marketplace. And we're doing that at VCU through our co-op program. I just feel like this is one of those things. It's a win-win situation. You get the opportunity for the company to evaluate talent, to make an investment in the ecosystem in this area, and the student gets the potential employee gets the opportunity to get experience, contacts, and things that they can put on their resume that are going to help them in the long run. So I think that's the starting point for all of this. And I said this earlier when we were talking to amongst ourselves. This is about hope. It's about getting people to be able to see that there's an opportunity in front of them that they may not have had in the past. And I think that this is something that I feel like at this stage of my life, giving back and making sure that people have great careers, to me, whether they're at VCU or Virginia State or within the greater Petersburg community, is something that I feel I'm very honored to be a part of, and the reason why I'm not retired at this stage of my life.
We appreciate that. Any parting words that you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap up and go to Q&A?
So here's what I'll say. I have a lot of collaborators in both industry and academia. And two of my best collaborators are the chair of the chemistry department and the chair of the chemical engineering department at MIT. And we've worked together on several projects. And one of the things when they came to our labs, they were pretty amazed at what we had down here. They said, "We don't have anything like this at MIT." And I said, "Well, it's amazing what you can do with $60 million. And so they all laughed and they said, "Well, how did you get the money?" And I said, "Well, it's pretty simple. I learned early on that if I compete with MIT in MIT space, I'll lose. I have to create my own space." And so this is one of the things I try to convey to our students. Don't be like everybody else. Don't be an incrementalist. Make huge step changes and take some risks. Just make sure those risks are balanced with the potential rewards. And I think that's what we need to make sure that these students are pushing the envelope, because we're not going to be able to solve the grand challenges of the 21st century while we're making 20th century mistakes.
This concludes the interview. We will proceed to Q&A.
So thank you so much for doing that pre-recorded interview. And we have, almost 46 people on this webinar, just ready to get some more nuggets of wisdom from you. And the first question we have already is, and thank you, Cal, for your question, how does transportation and cold storage companies fit into this ecosystem? And Cal and Frank, I think we may even have some other members of the Alliance on this call. So please, if you can answer that, or anyone else can chime in into the chat, that would be great.
So I think, Vanessa, the cold storage issue is one I think that's kind of related to a lot of biologics. we're working in the small molecule sector where cold storage isn't a requirement. But what I will say is this: working in this space helps us identify new opportunities that allow us to grow the ecosystem and bring other parties into the program. And having cold storage for vaccines and biologics becomes a really enabling capability that could draw us in and get more businesses into the area outside of the sector that we're currently working in, which is small molecules. The transportation issue, I think, is something that I think is chronic across the United States. But I think the more we can build our ecosystem to be able to have internal capabilities to do the majority of that work, it's going to make it easier. It's going to reduce the carbon footprint because it's all going to be local. You're not going to have to transport materials all around the country. The other thing I would say is by keeping this, developing a end-to-end capability within the region, you eliminate a lot of the issues associated with imports from ports and transporting materials and strikes and those types of things. I think this is a way to be able to insulate us from some of those things that are unforeseen circumstances that can disrupt the supply chain.
Thank you very much. And I do want to share with the audience that we have a global participation here on this call. So we thank you all for tuning in, excuse me, and being part of this very important work that we're doing. And as Frank says, we are growing an ecosystem. And based on that, the next question: bringing pharmaceutical manufacturing into the United States seems like it must require a national effort, which it does. Do you think achieving this will require bringing all parts of the country together to pull this off?
I think the issue, Vanessa, isn't about the national issue. I think it's more about, I don't know if you ever heard of the term about black swans. There's a thing called the black swan theory, and the problem is that if you haven't seen a black swan, to you they don't exist. Okay, now I think that the pharmaceutical industry has been outsourced to overseas operations for so many years. I think what we're doing is kind of a black swan. And so when you start thinking about what could happen as a result of demonstrating that we actually can be competitive globally, and we can create a robust supply chain here in Central Virginia, will allow others to see that it can be done. And I think that's the really important takeaway. And one of the things I tell people all the time is, on this particular project, for that reason, failure is not an option. I think that we all have to be successful collectively rather than independently. And I think that that's it's a bit of a challenge when you start looking at all the individual partners who have their individual issues and figuring out how to get them to coalesce around this common objective. To me, is what really is important here at the end of the day. And we've seen that as we built the coalition. Parties would say, I want this or I want that. And the question you have to ask yourself is in what's in the best interest of the collective group as opposed to individuals. And I think that we've come a long way with that. We still got a ways to go, but we've come a long ways.
And we have talked about the alliance and the coalition, Medicines for All, which you are the founder and CEO of. Could you share with the audience the organizations that are part of the alliance with this APM ecosystem?
Oh my! I think that I think that the problem that you have with that, Vanessa, is there's so many organizations. I'll just mention them in groups. Mm-hmm. The individual manufacturing operations down in Petersburg, of which there, I think. Novo Nordisk just joined the site, which is the second largest pharmaceutical company in the world. They're coming in, flows down there, as is Civica. But then you got all of these other organizations like the community colleges, Virginia State, VCU, that are working on trying to help us create a workforce supply chain to be able to meet the needs of that organization. And then you've got the other economic development authorities that are going to benefit from this that have to work together, which is, not always the case. Sometimes I use the analogy, it's like herding cats sometimes. But I think what this did was it not only gave us an opportunity towards working closer together, but working closer together towards a common endpoint. And I think that's what's been an annealing force between all of our economic development partners. They get it. And I think the state gets it. And that's what has given us the opportunity to take a lead position in this space.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And the next question from Charlotte, thank you so much. The Institute and Alliance have achieved great things together so far. What is still missing that is needed to accelerate the mission further? That's a question. For example, regulation changes, funding stability, workforce, infrastructure, changes. Oh man, she has really listed a lot here.
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to go back and look at that question so that I can make sure I can capture it.
Okay. Yes.
I think the interesting thing is, so that's my friend Charlotte. So Charlotte's head of a big company in the UK who I've worked with for years. So Charlotte, thanks for the comments, and thanks for all of those issues that you brought up. I think that there are opportunities to do things more efficiently, and I think that the question is, it's about risk and reward, and also, as I mentioned earlier, and it's also about thinking about how to do things differently. I'll give you a good example, and Charlotte probably knows this as well as anybody. So if you start looking at the way drugs, active ingredients are produced for small molecules, they're multi-step syntheses, and they require a series of specific chemical reactions in order to achieve the product, the active ingredient. The challenge with that is that, and I mentioned earlier about this issue about carbon footprint, each one of those steps requires isolation of each intermediate. And when you do that, you generate huge quantities of organic waste from the solvents. So the question we asked ourselves is, why do we isolate intermediates? And to me, that was one of those epiphanies that we came up with about waste and an opportunity, because what we did was we found out that maybe what we're using is substandard chemistry. And if we go back and develop new chemistry that doesn't generate the byproducts, we don't have to crystallize the product out, and we can carry it forward to the next step. And that's actually what we did with this HIV drug, the first one we worked on with the Gates Foundation. The drug's called nevirapine. We took a multi-step process and converted it into a one-pot reaction. We did it both batch and continuous. And the interesting thing about it was, not only did we reduce the cost, but I mean, we made a huge step change in reduction of the organic waste in the process. The original process was generating about 80 kilograms of organic waste per kilogram of product. We cut it to 4. And by doing it, when we did that, we actually got recognized by the American Chemical Society. We won the ACS Award for Affordable Green Chemistry, as well as the Presidential and the EPA Award for Green Chemistry. So these are all things that that I see as benefits from doing this. But in doing that, it's causing us to think different about how we train our students. Because when students leave our program and go to say a pharmaceutical company, I was on the other side of this for a number of years, and what I found was that from the time a scientist or an engineer comes to the company to the time when they become a productive asset is anywhere between 6 and 18 months, and it's because of the way they've been trained. They've been isolated with both just chemistry or engineering, and that's one of the unique things about our program. So we have chemists and chemical engineers cohabitating with one another. They cross-train each other, and they've become more valuable. And I have to step back and comment on something that happened to me last week. I gave a talk down in South Carolina with a bunch of pharma companies talking about catalysis, and we have a big catalyst center in our labs. And during after I gave my talk, one of the leaders at Pfizer came and talked, and another leader from Merck came and talked. At the end of the talk, they showed people who had worked on the project and the leaders on those projects. 3 of them came from my lab. And so the point being is, and after talking to them, they said, your students have come in and they hit the ground running because they've already gotten that experience. The other thing that we do that's kind of unique, Vanessa, is we give ownership to the students. And what we do is when we identify a drug target, like say the Gates Foundation says, we want you to work on this HIV drug or this tuberculosis drug. We go back and we benchmark it. We find out what is the actual method that's currently being used to make that product, and what are the costs associated with it, and what are the cost drivers. So we develop a spreadsheet, and then we give it to the students. And we say, okay, here's the process. Here's where the opportunities are for cost reduction. And they can actually, as they make changes, they update the spreadsheet, and they can see the effect of their work. And to me, that's a huge motivator for our people to be able to see those changes taking place in ways that maybe they wouldn't have in a traditional academic setting. Because the other thing I would say, in working with my colleagues at MIT, I had a great boss early in my career, and he pulled me aside when I first left graduate school, and he said, Frank, he said, if you'll remember 2 things, he says, you'll do well here. He says, you're coming from academia, and in academia, elegance is complexity. In industry, elegance is simplicity. And what we've tried to do is instill that in our students, that it's not just about developing something that's new and unique, but showing how we can actually use it in a way that's translational, that actually hits the marketplace and adds value to the consumer.
Very good.
Hopefully, Charlotte, that answered your question.
And I think it did, and more. We have a next question, which I think you probably have already answered, but the question from Jeremy: will the reduced carbon footprint continue to be a priority in the execution of the long-term plans? Which I think you may have answered, but go ahead and elaborate a little bit if you like.
Oh, I'd be happy to, Vanessa. This is something that's really important to me because it's kind of funny. Working with the Gates Foundation over the years, we instituted a lot of things that were kind of unique to the foundation, and one of them was the thing they called the Gupton chart. And the Gupton chart is just a simple chart that says, how much did you reduce the yield on how did you increase the yield on the process? How did you reduce the cost? And how many steps were in the process differential between the first when you started and the one you came up with, and what was the carbon footprint? Those are the 4 things that they always look at now when we start looking at measuring success on the drug targets that we've been working on for these years.
Okay. All right, let's get to the next one. From Lucas: based on your experience, what are the one or most difficult aspects in switching from the batch-wise to continuous manufacturing?
This is.
Do you want me to read it again?
Yeah, no, that's okay, Lucas. That was a great question. I think one of the things I've learned over the years, Vanessa, is it's easy to go from a continuous process to a batch process, but it's much more difficult to go from a batch process to a continuous process. And the reason for that is these processes typically have to be all in solution. And there's a lot of agitation in a batch reactor that allows you to work with solids, which is something that you can have some solids content, but not a whole lot with the flow, the continuous process. So the idea is, if we start with the outcome being a continuous process, then we build all of those issues into the process. And then if we wanted to convert it into batch, we could do that. But the challenge that we have with batch versus continuous, there are several advantages. And one of them is safety. So there are a lot of dangerous materials that we work with in the laboratory and in manufacturing. And by working continuous, you've actually mitigated a lot of that risk, because you never have a whole lot of that material in your system at any one point in time, as opposed to a big batch process. The other advantage you have is controlling temperature and residence time. And the ability to heat or cool a reaction mixture up is greatly enhanced in continuous processes. The other thing, go back to one of my old bosses. He told me, he said, Frank, he said, once you've made the product, nothing good can happen. And he was very right on target about that, because when you have these batch reactors, you have a long residence time of these materials after you've actually made the product, to cool them down and to transfer them over to the next step. In continuous processes, you could actually quickly reduce it, and the residence time become very short, so you minimize the amount of byproduct formation in the processes. The third thing that I think that is really important to these processes is a discussion that I had with a colleague of mine at MIT, and we were having this discussion. I said, why in the world did you call this stuff flow chemistry? And I said, because it implies it's kind of an engineering thing, and chemists are going to kind of steer away from it. So I said, what we should have called it was kinetic chemistry, because what it does is it allows you to isolate transients, intermediates, and react them on an as-needed basis. And that's exactly what we did. And I know I've got some of my students listening today. I don't know if you knew this or not, Vanessa, but there's a TB epidemic out there right now. And it's mostly in Asia and in Africa. About 80% of the HIV-infected patients that die every year die of tuberculosis. And this is a resistant strain of TB that it doesn't work with all the old drugs. And there hasn't been a new drug in the marketplace for TB in a long time. So there was one drug that actually worked. And our group developed the problem with it was that it had a carcinogen in it. And we developed a way to be able to make an intermediate and react it immediately so that that carcinogen wouldn't form. And we could only have done that with flow chemistry. So those are some of the examples that I can think of about the advantages of flow chemistry versus batch chemistry and how we might be able to use them. The other thing I will say is this. Our group is more economically driven than we are based on which platform that we want to use. The one that makes the most sense to use, whether it's batch or continuous, is the one we're gonna favor, because it's all about cost of goods and reducing the cost and increasing the availability to the patients.
Okay. Well, you've talked a little bit more and elaborated on batch and continuous. And Sean has a question in the chat that I think is quite related to that. What is your framework for evaluating the suitability for a process to become continuous, or if it works better in batch? This must be a very hot topic in your
good question. Good question, Sean. I think a lot of it gets back to this comment I made about flow reactors versus kinetic reactors. The kinetics on these processes are really what's driving a lot of this. Is if you have a slow reaction that you can't accelerate with heating, and it's going to take several hours to run the reaction, probably continuous isn't the way to go. But if it's a reaction has very favorable kinetics that goes quickly, then you have an opportunity to be able to run the process, do the reaction, and then carry it on, take it forward to the next step.
Okay. All right. And I am going to take just a slight pause. I put in a request. Frank had mentioned that he probably has his whole classroom watching this. So I'm going to ask if you are sharing this webinar with others in your space. And we're all about getting the data and the numbers. So if you can let us know how many people are in your space, or if you're the only one, that's fine. But if you have other folks who are in your office or classroom, please just pop that number into the chat. We appreciate that. In a minute or two, Jeremy will put up a survey. As I had mentioned, this is our last of a series of 7 supply chain webinar series to explain the ecosystem that's growing in our Richmond, Petersburg. Oh my gosh, 11 people in the room with Saeed. Thank you. There are So we are trying to grow this ecosystem. So we want to make sure that you all have gotten enough information to follow us along with the Alliance. And if someone can pop in some of the websites that we have been referencing over the last 6 webinars. We have websites for Medicines for All. Thank you so much. I appreciate that for you to get more information. These webinars have been recorded and they can be found on the Building Better Medicine or the Alliance for Building Better Medicine website. We have strived to tell the story. From beginning, starting with the mayor of Petersburg, Mayor Sam Parham, from the very beginning in December to tell the story. And he talked about infrastructure. And I remember Charlotte asked about some of those things like infrastructure and workforce. Those were some of the topics we talked about. The Petersburg infrastructure, then we had the economic development organizations who talked about how they have brought attention to this region. And I think maybe 1 or 2 of them on this Zoom. So we appreciate we're telling that story. Then we started talking about education and workforce development, which is all part of growing this ecosystem. And then last 2 weeks ago, we talked about cybersecurity, how to secure what we're doing here. So we have really, I think, Frank, when I first met you, 3 years ago, it was like, let me figure out how we're going to, how this all comes together. And I think you have been quite an essential part of all of this coming together. So thank you. The survey is going to pop up.
I was just going to, I wanted to give a shout out to my colleague, DeWitt Haley. DeWitt's been attached with me at the hip ever since we started this, and he's heading up the program at Virginia State, and a good friend and a great colleague, and is an example of how universities can work together collaboratively.
Very good. And he was also in that video that explained the APM. So we thank you so much for that. We are coming to the end of our time together. The webinar survey just popped up. We really would appreciate you taking a moment to finish that. What's next for us? What would you like to see, right? We are trying to determine if we want to do another in-person supply chain event. So we'll look at that for the future, and we hope that all those who are on this call will stay tuned for any announcements or any opportunities that might be coming in the future. Any other questions, or if you'd like to unmute and ask verbally of Frank, any questions? Thank you all so much. Would love to know if you ever do any events up in Boston. Ooh.
Every now and again, Vanessa, obviously, if you start looking at where a lot of the pharma companies are right now, I'll typically get invited up to Cambridge to give a talk or visit with my colleagues at MIT. I've been fortunate to be able to have some really close colleagues that share in kind of the vision of what we're trying to do down here.
Okay, sounds great. Sounds great. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is to stay tuned. You can always find more information on our Building Better Medicine website or Activation Capital. I have one more here from Mariam. I'm sure quite a few of us will be at Bio 2025, which is in Boston.
Very good.
All right. As we are wrapping up, I want to thank you again, Frank. When I asked you to do this as part of the series, you said, whatever you want me to do, Vanessa. And I was like, really? So thank you so much. And Charlotte, if you're in, Great Britain, the UK, thank you for being here, and have a lovely rest of the day, as she said, for everyone. and appreciate all that we've been able to accomplish with this webinar series. And thank you all, and have, as Charlotte says, a lovely day.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thank you. This concludes our webinar.